Hello, thank you for tuning in. We are the PepsiCo Ecom team. In our segment, we're talking about how our product design team, has grown within the PepsiCo Ecom organization. Now, before we actually get into this, I actually want to give ourselves a bit of an introduction as to who we are. First off, I'm Diana. Thank you for tuning in. And I'm the lead designer at PepsiCo Ecom. Essentially, I've been working with the team, the internal team, since April of 2019. For this year, for 2022 of April, it'll be my 3rd-year anniversary. Now, outside of working hours, I actually love to explore on my motorcycle, which is a very new hobby I picked up about 2 years ago, right before the pandemic. And at the time, I also have been running, but the thing is about the pandemic, I haven't ran an actual race with people. So one of the things I'm doing right now is actually training for my very first half marathon of 2022. Now, a bit of fun fact before I actually bring you over to my co-hosts, 2 co-hosts for today, who will be entertaining you at 3, the arcades. So I actually go to the local arcades and beat up a couple of people for 50 cents. And that may date myself because that's when the arcades were a thing. Now I'm going to hand you over to Jamie Lynn. She's one of my colleagues at PepsiCo Ecom. She is a senior UX designer. I'm going to hand it over to you, Jamie.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jamie, and I actually started working at Pepsi like right at the start of the pandemic. So I still don't really know how tall most of my coworkers are. I just know Zoom screens. Um, a lot of what I've been doing for the past 2 years, I think like a lot of other people, being indoors, I hung out with my cat a lot. I played a lot of video games, currently playing Dark Souls, which I think is like the hardest game known to mankind. And fun fact is I used to be fit pre-pandemic, and one of the most memorable races I've done is a 5K in an inflatable T-Rex costume. The hardest thing about that is actually it's really gross. It's just like you and your sweat trapped in in an inflatable dinosaur for like an hour. It's great. And with that, I'll hand it off to our engineer, Chris.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Chris. It is a great honor to be here speaking with you today. Before I get into some technical details, I do have one little fun fact announcement, and that is my daughter, Delphi, is 11 months old. So happy to have her in my life, and I'm looking forward for her to follow my footsteps in engineering and in the career. I started quite a while ago. The first program I ever sold was a golf application for the Palm OS. Way before iDevices even were a concept, we had these ancient Palm devices, and that was actually the first program I ever wrote. And since then, or sold, since then, I have these. And so things like Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and virtual reality. And that virtual reality is a big thing I've been working on a lot now, is trying to build using the Oculus Quest to build these virtual devices, and something I hope to bring my daughter into once she's old enough to be able to wear a headset. But when I joined Pepsi, I joined a greenfield project, which was supposed to be ideal in every developer's dream, because we weren't going to have the chaos and the mistakes and all those issues we had on old projects, because we got to decide everything from the ground up. And so to hear how that project went, I'm going to turn it back, and we're not going to have any of those old complications or any of that old headaches. And so to describe how we did that and the results of that, here is Diana.
Thanks a lot, Chris. And with that, Chris does lead us or segue us into the very subject of this talk, which is how do we even grow the team when we just started out, and where does product design fit within PepsiCo Ecom? It may not sound sexy, so we're going to try to make it more entertaining than it is. However, on a serious note, I do really hope that some of us, our stories will actually resonate with some of you out there who are in the middle of a rapid growth. So where does product design fit in PepsiCo in itself? Because a lot of you, I'm sure you think about beverages, snacks, and even energy drinks and such when it comes to PepsiCo. PepsiCo Ecom is actually part of a arm, if not maybe a leg or a child or whatever, of PepsiCo, the parent company. PepsiCo Ecom is actually spun off as its own little iteration, meaning we're actually able to have the same environment as a startup environment. We have the same sort of advantages of innovating, trying new technologies that's out there. And yeah, it's the same kind of environment that you would find in a startup. But the only advantage that we probably have is that we actually have products too, in terms of snacks, business units, that we actually need to push out to customers. The reason why PepsiCo Ecom actually started out is that PepsiCo wanted to be ahead of the game. They wanted to be sure that they too can deliver to consumers in a place where a lot of customers are now changing their ways of purchasing products online, thus PepsiCo Ecom. Within PepsiCo Ecom, we actually have 3 different pillars or verticals: D2C, direct to consumer; B2B, business to business; and internal, where I sit, or enterprise. Now, within each of these pillars, we actually need support. That means engineers, design, product management, and even stakeholders are actually part of the process, depending on the vertical that we sit in. Now, when it comes to growing up, like life, same with like growing within a startup or a new team or a new org, there's going to be a lot of growing pains. And there were some things that we actually had to consider when we were building out PepsiCo Ecom. Now, if I didn't really mention in the beginning of my intro, and actually the very first product UX designer, I may have said that, I may have flubbed that part, but as a fun fact, sort of, I actually was the first product UX designer to help start the design team in PepsiCo Ecom. And with that, while we were continuing to scale, some of the management asked is, hey, we actually have to consider what is the groundwork for actually scaling the design team, if not the rest of the product team. I'm not a fortune teller, so it's really hard for me to anticipate what kind of tools might be out there in the next 2 to 3 years. So in the present moment, I decided, oh, okay, well, I'm going to start with Sketch. But while Pepsi Ecom was actually growing, there were actually legacy design teams that we need to collaborate with. And with that, they actually had their own legacy software that they were using, like Adobe XD. Now, this started to cause a problem because I'm not interested in having them adapt to a new tool when what they were doing was just fine. And there's also very little visibility for me to actually collaborate with them. So there was, sure, they could do their own thing, but at the same time, we're not actually unified as a design team, if not a design culture. So this created a lot of gaps and tunnels, and this created a lot of siloed experiences. Now, as we were growing in 2019, 2020 happened, which, there was a big global event that none of us can forecast, neither did PepsiCo Ecom. And that was a pandemic that really changed the way that customers were actually buying products online, such as Amazon.com, Walmart.com, just for pure examples here. So this really had to create a sense of urgency within the org where we really, really need to hire more talent, but not just hire talents to actually support these new solutions we're trying to build to keep up with the very new environment that 2020 created. And during that time, one of the hires is actually Jamie. Jamie joined the team in 2020, and she can actually speak from her experience in more detailed manner as to how it felt to actually join an ecom team or just a team at the time of rapid growth. Jamie.
Yeah. So, like Diana said, I joined during a time of like rapid team scaling. And what I was working on was a completely new platform, an order management platform for ecom. And I was working with a team of engineers, a really small, scrappy team of engineers. And our focus was delivering fast because there was so much to do in a short amount of time. And at the same time, we had this opportunity and buy-in from leadership to go ahead and also flesh out a design system, which is great. The goals being like across our different platforms, we could have more consistency, but also so we could design and develop faster. But of course, it was like easier said than done. In like the way the designers were structured is that each of us were sort of in our own platforms, kind of like in our own teams. And so while we kind of had this vision for a shared overall style, we would still have our own unique needs. So it wasn't like an immediate like, hey, we're going to use the exact same system, exact same components. Like I might have a very unique like shipping balancing table. Diana might have a very specific reporting table, for example. Additionally, because we were kind of in these different siloed teams, it was also difficult to kind of find a balance between, building components and designs for the engineers today, and then also like turning around and being like, hey, designers, I built this new thing. Does this work for you? And like, because my team was like also in a really rapid growth phase, As my platform scaled, as my engineers scaled, really like kind of staying on top of keeping everything consistent really fell to the wayside. And slowly we found that like our designs all start to deviate from each other.
And with that deviation from Jamie, thank you, Jamie, by the way, designers did not only have the only pain points, it also comes with the engineers. Since engineers, as you know, really work closely with designers. And on top of that, there's also product managers. We will touch base a little later on this specific talk, but I'm going to actually hand it over to Chris while we're on this sort of on the ground experience as to how it was like for the engineers when it comes to all these gaps and tunnels that were created since 2019.
Yeah, thank you. So when we started, we were a small, scrappy team where literally everybody could be in the meeting together. You could hold the entire application in your head. And working like that, we didn't need other tools. We didn't need any kind of organization because it was all in our head. We worked at a rapid pace and built things as quickly as we could to get them out there. But then suddenly we had this huge growth, and it went from managing one project to suddenly now I have 4 projects, and our team tripled in size in less than a year. And now I have all these new engineers who need to contribute in new projects that are being pulled off into different PMs and different groups. And so all of this suddenly became way more than you can keep in your head at a time, way more than I can actually sit down and discuss with the project manager or with the designer. Because we have this huge app, multi-facet app now, and the sudden growth caused all sorts of complications. You know, you'd run into things where I'd be developing one page and I need a color picker, so I go and pull one down and, oh, wait, another engineer already built one. Why aren't we using that? And we have things where it's like, okay, we have 2 different pages with different tables that look differently, but from a code perspective, they're not all that different, but I need to be able to talk with the engineers working on those teams. And I need to be able to communicate with them to make sure we stay on that same path. And that is really hard when you can't just sit in a meeting and go, yeah, here's the entire application out of my head. When you have to reference things and you start going, oh, here's this documentation and here's this concern, it becomes really complicated and we start to lose focus. We start to lose what we were doing and why we were doing it. I'll hand it back over to Diana.
Thanks a lot, Chris. And so you could tell between Chris and Jamie, a lot of the issues have really started because of different use of tools and also lack of visibility and context. It was just a lot going on. So one of the things that the designers and I started to do around 2020 is that, one, we recognize that there's a sense of urgency with growing the team, but also we need to unify in a way where a lot of us actually has an idea what's going on behind the scenes. And we actually got together and thought about Zeppelin. It was also based on past experience of us using the platform. One of the things about Zeppelin is that, one, it actually unify all the 3 tools between the designers and also the legacy design teams. Now they can retain their existing workflow between Adobe XD, Sketch, Figma, just fine. That's great. That's actually one of the common things that we actually all agreed on when it came to scaling amongst not just with the designers. The engineers were actually just happy with being able to extract code from our designs. So this was actually a good standing point in terms of where we're going to go. So we're going to actually start bridging actual workflows that made sense for whoever was coming on board. They actually have a sense of anchor point. And Zeppelin became the library sort of the truth, you would say, because we now actually can introduce ways for the partners, such as product managers, to now make annotations, comments on our designs. That's something that we don't often get to hear from, is seeing the product manager in the actual design platforms, being able to make notations, ask questions, and we are able to respond to them from designer to engineers. And then I think I could mention this again, that it started to help us kind of bridge these empty tunnels, these gaps, and this silo experience into something of a more of a collective community, I would say. And at the same time, again, I'm sure Jamie could start to see the changes when she's actually working with her team and growing out her own team during the time of this rapid growth. And I'm going to actually hand it back over to Jamie to speak a bit more on that.
Yeah. So, last I was kind of talking about the pain points of our like design system slowly deviating. And like looking back now, when I reflect on the changes that happened after moving to Zeppelin, I would say like the biggest things that I found really helped my team was just how Zeppelin was flexible to whatever stage of growth we had. It really like connected us at various milestones. So for example, when I was just starting when my platform was in complete infancy, I was able to use Zeppelin as a reference, like get inspiration or reuse components for whatever I was building. When I was like, in the phase of like churning out a bunch of new features, I was able to just like kind of collect everything I built, put it aside. And this was actually really helpful because it reduced that like constant context switching from like, I'm working on what's today, but I also need to think about like the future. So I could like come back at the end of a quarter or something and, talk to Dan and be like, hey, I have these components. Are they useful for you? And we could like fine tune it together then. And I would say like now or, future/now, my team has expanded so much that I'm no longer just like one designer on a single pod. I'm actually like there's actually 3 pods and 2 other designers that I collaborate with. So I can take what we've built and share this with them. And actually like the consistency is so much more important now because we're 3 designers working on the same platform. So it really is like tip of the iceberg with you and your like pretty finished components. It's like the whole thing. And it can like be there with you from the beginning to wherever you need to be.
Yeah, just to reiterate on Jamie's point, thanks, Jamie, on her story and her experience. It really amplifies what I was going through, especially now I was entering into a more mature state with my team. And I think that one of the big things about visibility, it's so important, even though I'm not necessarily collaborating immediately with some of Jamie's working files or anything like that, but it gave me visibility as to what her problems were being solved, how her design system started to look like, just so we can actually have some kind of motif or underlying theme to tie us back together as a whole in terms of design culture. Now we're going to actually hear Chris's experience as to how Zeppelin actually improved on the workflow, the software development process on his side.
Yeah. So to start off, if you're an engineer, Zeppelin has this amazing secret that has made all the engineers on our team so much more productive. And that is CSS. You can literally copy the CSS out of a Zeppelin project and paste it into your application, and it looks like the design. Mind blown. That is a game changer because we have a lot of different technologies we use. We may use React in one project, we may use Vue in another. And the way we build our CSS and the way we have to construct these things isn't always the same. And it's hard to match the design exactly the way they want. But with Zeppelin, what we actually have is this library of components. So not only can I discover the components and see what's there and what I can use, but it's also styled. And if I need to pull that into my project, I can literally just copy that style out and paste it in my project, which has been a game changer for us. And it also brings together that source of truth concept. As an engineer, source of truth is one of my big key points. I need to have that so we can all collaborate together and we can all work on the same project in a good way. And so having that source of truth is very important as an engineer, and Zeppelin does that for us because not only do we get the design, but we have the communication with the PMs. So while we're building out a page, the PM might have said, hey, I want this infinite scrolling list, but when we actually go to build it out, we go, oh, we're building a mobile app and we can't do that because it's inside a scroll container. Well, I can comment in the Zeppelin project and the designers can respond and we can have a whole discussion. And so when we deploy the app, the product manager isn't looking at the app going, wait a minute, this isn't what I meant, because they were part of that conversation. There isn't that surprise, which has solved so many of our pain points and has been such a great benefit that has made us be productive quickly, which was really the goal, is to be productive quickly with lots of people. And it does that.
I completely agree with that whole visibility, especially with product managers. The one key thing that was so painful is that the product managers, this is before we actually got Zeppelin, had no idea what was going on once the scoping meetings were done, once the discovery process or discovery meetings were done. They just assumed that whatever they said in the meetings will happen. But the problem is they had no way of voicing what's going on or seeing what's going on. So one thing about Zeppelin, it really truly improved the visibility of what's going on within their own teams and what's going on behind the scenes, as Chris mentioned. Like the development process is now much more visible to them, and we could quickly iterate once there's a change. Now, one of the key things that we felt in terms of takeaway as we wrap up our story or our session here is that find a common ground within your teams. That's the one thing that I don't doubt that Jamie and Chris don't disagree on this, is that we really need to find an anchor point where we can come together as a team, regardless of where you're coming from, engineers, product managers, or product designers, find a way where it actually feels like you're part of a cohesive team. Being silos may be fun, but the only thing is you kind of deviate, as Jamie said, a lot from what you're doing. And then it starts to feel like a different product, a different company's work. And another thing is about growing just within life, there's always going to be challenges. Just because we have Zeppelin now, we're not going to not think there's going to be another challenge as we continue to scale and grow our teams. So do expect challenges. And also, as challenges do come, try to be flexible to change, flexible to new technology, play around with things. But this is not to say to just like the legacy team to say, hey, adapt to this new tool just because it's newer. We don't care about your whole deep-rooted history. Let's just try to collaborate if that's even the case. But try to respect people's work process because it works for them. Why not find a different common ground, bridge your gaps together? The one thing I have to say in terms of being flexible is the e-com team I joined in 2019 is definitely a different team where I am now in e-com version 2022, because I think we are much more structured. And I'm sure Chris will probably agree, because he actually was one of the core members who actually joined around the same year I have. And with that, I want to give a big shout out, a big thank you to the crew at Zeppelin and its production crew for putting this together and having the PepsiCo e-com team on board on Harmony. And we are hiring, believe it or not, because we are still expanding. Feel free to reach out between me or Jamie or Chris with our user handles on this slide, or with questions. By all means, I love to connect with other people out there, especially colleagues of designers and engineers. And I wish you all an enjoyable day here. Just stick around. There's going to be other fantastic guests on Harmony. And have a great rest of your 2022. I really hope that you gain something out of our talk. All right. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.